Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, one of history's most compelling and chilling mysteries. How did an entire established European civilization, thriving for nearly 500 years, in a place as formidable as Greenland, simply vanish?
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It really is. We're talking about a community that, at its peak, numbered around 2,500 people.
A vibrant
Society, they built sturdy stone churches, farmed the land, raised livestock, engaged in vital trade with mainland Europe, and then just silence, without a trace, a profound, unsettling silence that's, well, echoed through centuries.
It truly is a saga of extraordinary human ingenuity and sheer tenacity. To endure for 5 centuries in such a marginal, such a challenging Arctic environment is, well, by any measure, a testament to their resilience, their pioneering spirit.
Absolutely.
But that remarkable endurance ultimately gave way to this disappearance that has baffled historians, archaeologists, climatologists for centuries. It's prompted, countless theories and investigations.
Right. And our mission today is really to move beyond those simplistic narratives.
Yeah.
The ones that try to boil down complex history into a single, easy answer.
Yeah, it's never that simple.
Never. So we're going to synthesize a wealth of evidence drawing from archaeological finds, paleoclimatic data, economic analyses, historical records, all of it. To meticulously piece together this complex puzzle, our goal is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from all the available information, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed on this enduring historical enigma. We want you to understand not just what might have happened, but why it matters, even today.
Indeed. And to truly grasp the depth of this mystery, I think we have to set the scene. We need to go back to that profound discovery made in 1721. You have to imagine the Danish-Norwegian missionary Hans Egede.
Right.
He set sail aboard his ship, the Hope, on a mission born of, well, fervent hope, but also shrouded in uncertainty. He was convinced that descendants of the Norse settlers still lived in Greenland. Isolated, sure, but perhaps clinging to their old Catholic faith.
After centuries of no contact.
Exactly. 2 centuries. His goal was to find them, convert them to Protestantism. But the reality he encountered, it wasn't a thriving community. It wasn't any community. It was just desolate, a haunting scene.
And what he found there, or maybe more importantly, what he didn't find, is just as crucial as any artifact, isn't it?
Precisely. MG had explored the remote fjords, navigated these icy waters, and eventually landed in what was once the heartland of the Norse settlements. And what greeted him? Crumbling stone church walls, the only sort of grand remnants of 5 centuries of occupation, surrounded by empty farms, skeletal remains of cattle still in their stalls, moss-filled ruins of homes and byres.
Cattle bones in the stalls. That paints a picture.
It does. And he famously recorded his profound perplexity, noting the complete absence of people, and specifically, no graves, no diaries, no ships.
No graves, no diaries, no ships. That's such a haunting phrase. It really sticks with you.
It's chilling.
It left Urge utterly bewildered. He wrote, what has been the fate of so many human beings, so long cut off from all intercourse with the more civilized world? And he himself struggled, didn't he? Finding resources, even trying alchemy at one point for fuel.
That's the story, yes. It underscores the harshness. But that image he painted of 2,000 people who simply melted into Arctic silence, it really frames the central question for us today, doesn't it?
It does. What did happen to the Norse of Greenland? And maybe more importantly, what can we learn from it?
It's the ultimate cold case, quite literally. And to even begin to understand the disappearance, we first have to understand their extraordinary beginnings. How did they not only survive, but for a significant period actually flourish in such an incredibly demanding, marginal environment?
Right. It wasn't just survival. It was success for a time.
Exactly. It's a story of audacious ambition and a deep commitment to a way of life, even against really overwhelming odds.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Set the stage for their arrival. The settlement of Greenland by the Norse, it really stands out, doesn't it? One of the most remarkable chapters in medieval European expansion.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just a few adventurers washing ashore. It was, well, ambitious. A planned colonization effort, driven by this charismatic, formidable figure, Garrick the Red. He spearheaded this venture around 985-986 CE, leading a group primarily from Iceland, establishing what became known as the Eastern and Western settlements. What fueled such an audacious undertaking? Why Greenland?
Well, Eric the Red himself was a complex character, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, apparently, which perhaps speaks to that adventurous, maybe even desperate spirit that often propelled these early North Atlantic explorations.
A bit of a risk taker then.
You could say that. But this wasn't just about finding any new land. It was about carving out a new society, a new life. Iceland's population was growing, land was becoming scarce. So settlers, primarily from Iceland, but also drawing people from Norway, Denmark, even Sweden, were looking for opportunities. They weren't just seeking new pastures, but new beginnings, a chance to establish their own chieftaincies, maintain their distinct Norse identity.
And the way they settled was quite distinct, I understand. Not compact villages, but these dispersed farmsteads, connected by networks of seasonally occupied sheilings. What exactly were those?
That's a crucial observation, yeah. Sheilings, or setter in Old Norse, were temporary shelters and pastures, often
Right.
rudimentary, typically located higher up, more remote, used specifically during the summer months.
Okay.
Livestock, especially sheep and goats, would be driven to these upland pastures to graze. This allowed the primary, fertile, low-lying pastures around the main farmsteads to recover to grow hay for the winter.
Smart. Maximizing resources.
Exactly. This decentralized, dispersed farmstead model, plus the sheilings, tells us two important things. First, it reflects the scattered, limited nature of good land in Greenland's fjords. No vast plains here.
Right.
Second, it indicates a highly strategic, extensive use of every available patch of grazing resource. They weren't just huddled in one valley. They practiced a sophisticated form of land management, rotating livestock, exploiting every ecological niche to maximize fodder in a very challenging landscape.
It shows real ingenuity, adapting their traditional system.
Definitely. A deep, practical understanding of resource management within their framework.
So they literally brought their entire way of life with them. Lock, stock, and barrel from Europe. Our sources call it an agricultural niche package. Can you elaborate on what that package involved and why it was so, well, profoundly significant to their identity?
The agricultural niche package, it's a good term. It refers to the complete suite of domesticated animals and cultivated plants the Norse meticulously transported. We're talking non-native species, foundational to their society. Cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, even dogs and cats.
Wow, the whole menagerie.
Pretty much. And alongside the animals, they brought seeds and knowledge for cultivation, most notably hardy grains like barley. Now, for the Norse, farming wasn't just about food. It was integral to their cultural identity, their social hierarchy, their sense of self.
More than just sustenance.
Much more. Owning land, raising specific livestock, especially cattle cultivating crops. These weren't merely economic activities. They were central to what it meant to be a respectable, free Norseman or woman. It represented their heritage, social standing, their connection to Europe. It was, in essence, a monumental cultural investment, literally transplanting their familiar landscape and society to this new, alien, ecologically fragile place.
And was there actual proof they managed to grow crops in Greenland,
Uh-huh.
despite the climate? Or was it just, wishful thinking?
Oh, no, it wasn't wishful thinking. The archaeological evidence is strong, compelling, actually. For instance, at 4 different farmsteads in the eastern settlement, archaeologists have found charred grains and, significantly, traces of threshing waste.
Threshing waste, meaning they were processing it.
Exactly. This isn't just a stray seed blowing in, it's evidence of processing, strongly suggesting that barley, a relatively hardy grain, was indeed cultivated there. It speaks to their relentless effort, their skill, that they managed to make European-style farming work, even if it was difficult, often precarious in a subarctic environment.
Shows that initial success in adapting, at least for a while.
Right, during that specific window of opportunity.
Fascinating. But this wasn't just about self-sufficiency, was it? Their success seems deeply tied to mainland Europe. What was their primary economic engine? And what vital resources did they absolutely need to import?
Their economic ties to Europe weren't just important, they were a lifeline, truly. Greenland was, and still is, desperately short of certain vital resources for a medieval European society.
Like what?
Iron, for one, absolutely crucial for tools, weapons, implements. Incredibly scarce on the island. And timber, for sturdy buildings, repairs, and crucially, for building and maintaining ships. Also in critically short supply.
Right, Greenland's trees are mostly dwarf birch and willow, not exactly shipmast material.
Not at all. So they relied almost entirely on trade with Europe to get these essentials. That connection was paramount for their survival, their societal function.
Okay, so they needed imports. What did Greenland have to offer Europe that was valuable enough to sustain this trade for centuries?
Without a doubt, their primary export was walrus tusks.
Ah, the Arctic ivory.
Exactly. Incredibly highly prized luxury items in medieval Europe, used for intricate carvings, religious objects, decorative items, practical luxuries like the famous Lewis chessmen.
Those are amazing pieces. Really shows
Yeah,
the craftsmanship.
they do. They're a tangible example of the exquisite work done with walrus ivory, showcasing its desirability, its value in the European elite market. Beyond ivory, they also traded other valuable things: skins, hides, pelts from cattle, sheep, seals, and rope made from walrus hide known for its exceptional strength.
So ivory was king, but they had other goods too.
Yes, but ivory was the main driver. Those Lewis chessmen carved from this precious material really drive home how valuable it was.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe challenges some older ideas. Recent scholarship suggests that the pursuit of walrus ivory might have been a more significant driver for colonization than just finding farmland. That shifts things, doesn't it?
It's a crucial reevaluation, yeah. It forces us to consider a more complex set of motivations. Traditional narratives often emphasize that Norse drive for agricultural land, pushing outwards for farming.
Right, the land hunger idea.
But by the time Eric the Red sailed for Greenland, Icelandic walrus populations were already significantly depleted, overhunted earlier. Yet, the demand for ivory in Europe was booming. Growing, urban elite, thriving luxury market. They needed news sources.
So Greenland looked like a fresh supply.
Exactly. The argument is that the prospect of virgin, abundant walrus hunting grounds in Greenland might have been as compelling, maybe more compelling, than just finding new pastures. And this is profound because it highlights a foundational economic vulnerability right from the start.
How so?
Well, if the colony's existence was primarily based on the supply and demand of a volatile luxury market, a market totally external to Greenland, its long-term viability was inherently precarious, regardless of their farming success.
Dependent on shifting European tastes and supplies.
Precisely. It meant they were always vulnerable to external market forces completely beyond their control. The kind of single resource dependency that could, and perhaps did, prove fatal.
And that precariousness deepened when they formally affiliated with the Norwegian crown in 1261, leading to a royal trade monopoly. How did that political shift hit them?
Right, 1261. That affiliation and the subsequent royal trade monopoly essentially stripped the Norse Greenlanders of direct control over their own trade. Before that, they had some autonomy, trading with various private merchants, ship owners.
But the monopoly changed that.
Completely. They became tied to a single, centralized, and often less reliable channel: the Norwegian crown's trade ships. Yes, it embedded Greenland more into the European sphere, but it also made them even more susceptible to the whims, the politics, the inefficiencies of a distant authority.
So problems in Norway directly hit Greenland's lifeline.
Immediately, political turmoil, economic downturns, even just shipwrecks in Norway could cut off Greenland's essential supplies, iron, timber, and block their ivory exports. It's a classic case of becoming dependent on a fragile, single-point supply chain. Their destiny was increasingly decided elsewhere. It fundamentally undermined their autonomy, their resilience.
So they established this ambitious, precarious, trade-dependent agricultural society in a harsh place. But for a surprisingly long time, it actually worked. And it seems a big factor was the medieval warm period. What was this climatic phase, and how did it help them flourish against the odds in Greenland?
The medieval warm period, yeah. Broadly spanning, say, 800 to 1300 CE, or maybe more specifically for Greenland, roughly 950 to 1250 AD. It was a distinct climatic phase that offered significantly warmer, more stable conditions across much of the North Atlantic.
A lucky break for them.
Absolutely, a period of grace, a window of opportunity. For the Norse settlers in Greenland, it meant notably longer growing seasons, critical for their barley and crucially for producing enough hay to overwinter their livestock. It also meant less severe winters and, importantly, less sea ice in those crucial shipping lanes.
Making trade easier, safer.
Much. These conditions were remarkably favorable for the European agricultural practices they brought. It allowed both crop cultivation and livestock farming to thrive, more or less simultaneously. It was, in essence, a climatic stroke of luck, a benevolent environmental anomaly that provided the conditions for their settlement to take root, expand, flourish for several centuries, gave them perhaps a false sense of security.
So their initial prosperity, this impressive success, was almost built on a climatic anomaly. That sounds less like a stable foundation, more like a ticking clock.
Precisely. That's one of the most critical insights from modern research into their demise. Their initial success, paradoxically, relied on environmental conditions that were not typical for Greenland's high latitude. The phrase scholars often use is that their cultural investment in transported domesticated landscapes limited their capacity to adapt.
Meaning their way of life was tied to conditions that wouldn't last.
Exactly. Their deeply ingrained cultural adherence to this European agricultural system, optimized for a different climate, contained the very seeds of their future vulnerability. They built their entire society, identity, economy, status around a system only viable because of a temporary climatic phase. This profound reliance on an anomaly meant they were inherently unprepared for the inevitable environmental shifts to come. It's like building your house on a sand dune, knowing the tide will eventually come in, but hoping it won't, and failing to build on bedrock.
That initial prosperity ironically cemented a way of life that would later become a critical liability.
Perfectly put, setting the stage for profound, insurmountable challenges down the line.
What a setup. So they thrive for centuries, but their success is built on this precarious, almost deceptive foundation. And then we reach a moment in time, the Svalbard wedding in 1408 CE, the last definitive glimpse of the Norse in Greenland. After that, just this eerie silence. Tell us about this wedding.
Yes, the Hvalsey wedding, September 1408. It's truly poignant, pivotal, because it represents the last definitive written record we have of them. Hvalsey Church itself in the eastern settlement is remarkably well preserved even today. You can see these impressive stone walls standing against the landscape.
Wow.
It was a Catholic church, part of a typical Norse farmstead banqueting hall, livestock pens, the usual. The wedding itself was between Thorstein Olafsson and Sigrid Bjørnsdottir. And it's not just a passing mention, it was meticulously documented. Letters from a priest at Gerjar, the old episcopal seat, and several Icelandic observers attended.
So a solid historical anchor point.
Definitely.
And it's a significant detail. The newlyweds, Thorstein and Sigrid, subsequently chose to settle in Iceland. What does that imply about the state of things back in Greenland then? Sudden collapse, or?
This detail is absolutely crucial, and yeah, often debated. The fact this young couple, after marrying in Greenland, chose to move to Iceland rather than stay. It hints strongly at an ongoing, maybe slow outward migration already underway.
People were already leaving.
It suggests that by 1408, the perception of Greenland as a desirable or even sustainable place to live might have been diminishing for its own inhabitants. It wasn't necessarily a sudden catastrophic end right after the wedding, but this detail suggests a gradual bleeding of the population, a quiet emigration already in motion.
And other evidence supports that phased decline.
Yes, archaeological evidence and radiocarbon dates back this up. They suggest that while the Western settlement was indeed depopulated by the mid-14th century, about 50 years before this wedding, the Eastern settlement continued to be populated until at least the mid-15th century.
So staggered end.
Yeah.
Not all at once.
Clearly, a phased, not synchronous, decline, suggesting a slow, inexorable process, not a sudden vanishing act.
So after 1408, this last glimpse, we enter this profound, utterly unbroken silence. No more ships, no letters, no trade records, no direct contact. This 300-year void, it becomes central to the mystery itself.
Absolutely. Imagine it, an entire transatlantic community just dropping off the map for 3 centuries. For Europeans back home, it was like Greenland had literally swallowed its settlers whole. This lengthy void became fertile ground for speculation, for myth. European maps kept showing Greenland as inhabited for centuries, even though no one had heard from the Norse for generations.
Wow. Just kept drawing them in.
Yeah. This prolonged silence didn't just mean a lack of data, it actively shaped the enduring enigma. Cemented the mystery and the collective consciousness, fueled the questions we still ask today. It underscored their sheer isolation, their precariousness, how easily a distant colony could simply be forgotten.
And then, as we mentioned, after this centuries-long silence, Hansa Code sails in 1721. The hope, his mission, find the Norse, convert them from their presumed Catholicism, but instead of people, he finds this haunting desolation.
Aged's account is heartbreaking, captures that profound sense of loss. He meticulously explored the fjords, painstakingly searched the valleys, hoping for any trace of his long-lost countrymen. But the only people he encountered were the Thule Inuit hunters. They were relatively recent migrants south themselves, though their ancestors had certainly met the Norse.
And the Inuit pointed him to the ruins.
They directed him to the crumbling stone church walls, those magnificent structures, ironically the only grand remnants of 5 centuries of Norse occupation. His findings were stark, consistent, empty farms, those cattle skeletons still in stalls, that curious, telling detail, moss-filled ruins of homes and byres.
And his famous summary.
No graves, no diaries, no ships. It wasn't casual. It was the bewildered report of a missionary who found everything but the people he sought. And his own personal struggles there, dealing with resource constraints, running low on supplies, maybe even trying alchemy for fuel. It just underscores how harsh, unforgiving, isolating that environment could be, even for an 18th century European with support.
His failure wasn't for lack of trying.
No. It was for lack of anything left to find.
So Aegid's observations, or maybe his lack of observations, those striking absences, people, graves, diaries, ships, they provide a crucial baseline for all the archaeology that followed, right? What did these absences tell us, and what don't they tell us?
The absences E.G. noted are, profoundly significant, as important as any physical remains for reconstructing what happened. Let's break them down. The cattle bones in stalls, particularly telling. They suggest a departure that was either so sudden the animals perished from neglect, starvation, or so unhurried and organized that the humans left without their livestock, maybe taking only what they could carry, which implies leaving their primary agricultural capital behind.
Interesting. And the lack of ships.
Also critical, especially for the mass migration idea. If everyone or most people left by ship, where did those ships go? Why no record, archaeologically or historically, of them being built or departing? Their absence implies a lack of seagoing capability at the very end.
Okay. And the graves, or lack thereof.
The lack of new graves after a certain point, combined with the absence of human remains within the abandoned dwellings, also highly significant. Given their strong Christian burial rites, you'd expect bodies to be interred soon after death in dedicated, consecrated cemeteries.
Right, not left in houses.
Exactly. Their absence in dwellings suggests people either left or their bodies were removed for proper burial elsewhere. It argues against them simply perishing en masse in their homes and being left unburied.
And how do these specific observations by E.G. directly shape the core hypotheses? Mass perishment versus organized abandonment.
They absolutely frame that central debate. If there were truly no graves, no diaries, no ships, and empty houses, it lends weight to competing ideas. On one hand, maybe mass perishment, perhaps no one left to bury the dead, or everyone died at sea trying to leave. The houses being clean argues against a sudden collapse inside the farmsteads from starvation or disease. On the other hand, if valuables were taken and bodies weren't found in situ in the houses, it could strongly suggest organized abandonment. They took valuables, buried their dead properly, maybe in cemeteries lost to time, and left. So Aegid's report becomes this critical starting point. It forces us to consider the implications of both presence and absence in the record, highlights the interpretative challenges that fuel the debate even now.
It's a mystery where the missing pieces are often the loudest clues.
Well put.
So we've set the scene. Ambitious beginnings, fragile foundation, profound silence. Now, what did happen? Modern research, as you said, moves beyond simple narratives, beyond just blaming stubbornness or one catastrophe. We're talking about a perfect storm of interconnected factors.
Exactly. The older theories often painted the Norse as culturally rigid, technologically backward, unwilling to adapt, leading to their inevitable doom. Popularized ideas often, but contemporary research, drawing on decades of interdisciplinary work, presents a much more nuanced and frankly more tragic picture. It shows a community that did, in fact, attempt to adapt, but was ultimately overwhelmed by this crushing combination of environmental, economic, and social pressures. Together, they pushed them beyond their breaking point. It truly was a perfect storm. Each factor didn't just add to the burden, it profoundly exacerbated the others. A cascade of vulnerabilities.
Not just fighting one battle, but many simultaneously.
Precisely, on multiple fronts.
Okay, let's dive into the first, maybe most foundational element. Climate's cold embrace. We heard about the medieval warm period helping them get started, but that warmth gave way to the Little Ice Age. When did that start to bite in Greenland, and how profound was the impact?
The shift from the relative warmth to the biting chill of the Little Ice Age was, well, nothing short of catastrophic for the Norse. While the medieval warm period generally faded around 1300 CE, the Little Ice Age began imposing its frigid conditions across the North Atlantic much earlier, around 1250 CE, and it persisted for centuries, ushering in this prolonged era of global cooling well into the mid-19th century.
And specifically in Greenland, was it gradual?
For Western Greenland, the paleoclimatic data, especially from lake sediment cores, tells a stark story. A substantial average temperature drop, something like 3.9 degrees C, that's a chilling 7-degree aperture drop, occurred relatively rapidly, between 1100 and 1180 CE.
Wow, 7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's huge, especially there. And rapid, too.
Exactly. Not a gradual shift over centuries.
Yeah.
A significant, rapid, profound change within just a few generations. It would have had immediate escalating consequences for their fragile farming system. Such a temperature drop dramatically shortens growing seasons, increases winter severity and duration.
Okay, a 7-degree drop sounds immense. What were the specific cascading effects on the settlements, their way of life?
The impact was multifaceted, devastating, created a domino effect across their whole society. First, colder temps meant a dramatic increase in sea ice.
Making travel harder.
Much harder. This ice didn't just appear in patches, it clogged the fjords, the surrounding seas, made navigation and crucially shipping incredibly difficult, dangerous, often for extended periods.
Right, getting those vital supplies from Europe.
Imagine trying to get ships carrying iron and timber through an impassable icy strait, or hunting in waters now choked with dangerous flows that could crush their smaller boats. This directly hindered trade. Harder to export ivory, harder to receive indispensable imports. For a society utterly dependent on external trade, this was a direct assault on their lifeline.
So their critical trade routes became treacherous, maybe even impassable for much of the year. What about the impact on land? Farming.
On land, the colder, often drier conditions drastically dwindled the already short growing season. Barley cultivation became even more unreliable. More critically, hay production absolutely essential for overwintering their livestock, especially cattle, their biggest status animals plummeted.
And colder winters meant animals needed more hay.
Exactly. Longer, harsher winters meant animals spent more time indoors, demanding even greater quantities of hay. A vicious cycle. The climate also became erratic, unstable, oscillating between record highs and lows before settling into this consistently cold, often dry pattern. There's even compelling research suggesting natural atmospheric patterns, like the North Atlantic Oscillation, NAO. Yeah, a major, large-scale climate pattern affecting weather across the North Atlantic. When the NAO index was unfavorable, it brought particularly cold, dry air to Greenland. That further exacerbated the problem, reduced precipitation for pastures, increased likelihood of extreme cold snaps.
How robust is the evidence for these climate changes? Is it just historical accounts or is there hard science?
Oh, the evidence is incredibly robust, comes from multiple independent lines of scientific inquiry, makes the conclusion very strong. We have data from central Greenland ice cores, incredibly detailed annual records of past temperatures, atmosphere, precipitation, going back thousands of years.
Okay.
We also have high-resolution tree ring studies from relevant areas, sea sediment cores capturing ocean temperatures and ice cover, and precise analysis of things like calcium carbonate in lake sediment cores, natural thermometers, basically. All these independent methods consistently show a clear temporal correlation between these significant climate shifts, the onset and deepening of the Little Ice Age, and the period of Norse decline and disappearance.
So it's not just a hypothesis. It's backed by converging scientific data.
A very clear picture of dramatic environmental change, yes.
You mentioned earlier that older theories often painted the Norse as stubbornly inflexible. But our sources say they toughed it out for at least 200 years during the Little Ice Age, even shifted subsistence strategies. So they did try to adapt.
They absolutely did, and this is crucial for the modern, more nuanced view. They weren't just passive victims, stubbornly clinging to old ways. We see significant archaeological evidence they did attempt to shift subsistence, increased trapping of Arctic animals like caribou, seals, greater reliance on wild resources, trying to diversify beyond traditional farming.
So they showed ingenuity, resilience.
Considerable ingenuity, yes, in the face of worsening conditions. However, and this is the critical caveat despite these valiant efforts, their adaptations were ultimately not enough for long-term survival. The sheer scale, speed, persistence of the climatic shift, coupled with other compounding factors, just proved overwhelming. Their adaptations were incremental, while the challenge was systemic, profound.
So climate wasn't just one problem. It was a force multiplier, exacerbating every other challenge.
Right.
How did that work? Reducing their safe operating space.
Think of it like this. Climate change didn't just present one isolated challenge. It initiated a cascade of interconnected problems that amplified each other, a negative feedback loop. Colder temps directly meant less hay, stressing livestock, reducing food security.
Right.
More sea ice didn't just make trade difficult. It cut off access to vital iron and timber. Without those, tools broke. Houses couldn't be repaired, ships couldn't sail. Stormier, icier seas also made marine hunting, which they increasingly relied on, far more dangerous, less reliable. Losses of life, equipment.
Each problem made the others worse.
Exactly. Each environmental stressor multiplied existing vulnerabilities, reducing their safe operating space, that margin for error a society has before hitting a critical tipping point. They were pushed closer and closer to the brink. Even minor shocks could have catastrophic consequences, eventually overwhelming even their best adaptive efforts. It transformed a difficult but survivable environment into one utterly hostile to their specific way of life.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
A society pushed to its absolute limits. So, with that environmental hammer coming down, let's look at the economic linchpin, the walrus ivory trade. We established its crucial role, but how central was it, and what was its actual value back in Europe?
It wasn't just important, it was arguably the economic linchpin, the absolute foundation of their connection to the wider world, their ability to sustain a European lifestyle in the Arctic, their primary, almost sole valuable export, the currency allowing them to acquire critical imports like iron and timber. Without it, their ability to maintain European material culture, technology, would have crumbled.
And the value is high.
Astounding profitability, making Greenland, despite its remoteness, a significant economic outpost. Our sources give a concrete example. 1327 CE. A single parcel, 802 kilograms of Greenland tusks, a massive haul valued in Europe at the equivalent of about 780 cows or 60 tons of dried fish.
Wow. 780 cows for one shipment.
Right.
That's incredible wealth.
It really was not pocket change. High-value luxury goods coveted by the European elite positioned the Greenland Norse as vital suppliers in a lucrative, if distant, market.
But then that market experienced what you called a dramatic disruption. What happened in Europe that hit Greenland's economy so hard, given their reliance on this one export?
Several interconnected factors converged. An economic earthquake, really, that utterly destabilized Greenland's trade. By the 13th century, new, more efficient trade routes opened between Europe and West Africa, introducing a flood of cheaper elephant ivory.
Competition.
Huge competition. Simultaneously, new sources of walrus ivory from Arctic Russia also became available, often cheaper due to easier harvesting. On top of that, European aesthetic preferences began to shift.
Fashions changed.
Kind of. The homogeneous, smooth, easily carved finish of elephant ivory became more fashionable, more versatile for artisans than the marbled, sometimes imperfect look of walrus ivory with its distinctive patterns. Demand simply plummeted.
And the historical records show this.
Clearly, there's little evidence of walrus ivory imports to mainland Europe after 1400, a sharp, decisive drop-off in their primary export market. Not just a dip, a fundamental reordering of the luxury goods market.
And there's that telling detail about Pope Martin IV asking for silver or gold instead of tusks.
Absolutely. That detail concerning Pope Martin IV back in 1282 is a very direct telling indicator. He explicitly requested that tithes owed by the Greenland diocese, previously paid in tusks, be converted into silver or gold.
That speaks volumes.
It does. It wasn't a casual preference. It was a clear signal that the value, the liquidity, the desirability of walrus ivory had plummeted so much it wasn't even considered suitable payment for people's dues anymore. A massive demotion for their primary export, from high-value currency to something less desirable than precious metals. It sent a clear, though perhaps unheard, message that Greenland's economic foundation was eroding.
A huge blow. And paradoxically, our sources say that despite this plummeting value, the Norse somehow intensified their exploitation of walruses, leading to serial depletion. Why? That seems self-destructive.
This is a classic, tragic illustration of the resource curse, or maybe the tyranny of the immediate. As the value of their main export fell, they felt compelled to harvest more of it, just to try and maintain economic viability, meet their essential import needs for iron and timber.
Trying to make up for falling prices with more volume.
Exactly, a desperate attempt. But it only accelerated the problem. Led to serial depletion, exhausting populations in one area, then forced to move further afield, systematically overhunting. We see compelling evidence in the archaeology. A noticeable increase in ivory sourced from smaller, often female animals suggests they were taking whatever they could get, even juveniles breeding females, not just prime males.
Desperate measures.
And finding ivory from increasingly farther north, like remote Baffin Bay, points to hunters traveling immense distances, a clear sign local populations were exhausted.
So, literally going to the ends of their known world for less valuable tusks. A textbook classic pattern of resource depletion.
It absolutely is. Textbook example. Declining resource, intense economic pressure, lack of viable alternatives leads to intensified exploitation. forces hunters further afield for smaller, less valuable specimens, accelerating the resource's decline, severely undermined the settlement's resilience. This downturn in North Atlantic trade effectively rendered Greenland unable to sustain itself in the way it had.
And maybe internal problems, too, like for the elite.
We can speculate, yeah. For the Norse hierarchy chieftains, powerful families whose status was tied to this trade, the loss of prestige, wealth, may have damaged their authority, contributed to societal disintegration. A vacuum of leadership, internal tensions, it's a negative feedback loop. Decreasing ivory value pushes them to hunt more, depleting the resource, forcing longer, riskier voyages for less return, leading to economic collapse.
So the climate's turning against them. Their economic lifeline is fraying. Now let's talk agriculture. You mentioned their imported agricultural niche package. Culturally significant, but poorly suited. How did this system, so central to their identity, become a liability?
This ties right back to that cultural investment. The farming system they brought successful in Norway, Iceland, was simply not robust or flexible enough for Greenland's more extreme, colder, drier environment. They were trying to force a square peg into a round hole, culturally speaking. That fundamental misalignment severely limited their adaptive capacity when things got worse. Their methods, honed elsewhere, became a vulnerability, not a strength.
What were some specific challenges that illustrate this mismatch?
Well, their agro-pastoralism crops and livestock required clearing land for grazing and fields. In Greenland's fragile, thin-soiled ecosystem, this accelerated soil erosion, especially with strong winds, permafrost thawing.
Jared Diamond talked about this, right? Extensive environmental damage.
He did popularize the view that the Norse significantly damaged their environment, felling sparse trees, farming practices, exposing soils, turf cutting for building, leading to a self-inflicted ecological crisis, reducing productive land. The exact extent is debated, but erosion was certainly a factor.
Okay, what else?
But here's a particularly fascinating, counterintuitive detail. The manuring paradox.
Manuring paradox?
Yeah.
How? Isn't manuring always good for soil?
In milder European climates, absolutely. Boosts fertility, improves structure, enhances nutrients, best practice. However, in Greenland's uniquely cold climate, adding manure actually enhanced water retention in the soil.
Water retention. Sounds good. Why was it a paradox?
Because in Greenland, that extra water retention, combined with freezing temperatures, led to a problematic buildup of winter ground ice. When ground freezes with too much water, it can heave, expand, become severely compacted. This meant a significantly delayed spring thaw. The ice in the soil took much longer to melt, and a delayed spring thaw in an already drastically short growing season meant even less time for plants, especially hay and barley, to grow.
Directly hitting their fodder production.
Exactly. Stressed fodder production likely contributed to increased livestock mortality. Animals had less to eat or needed more labor-intensive feeding. So, a practice cornerstone to good farming in Europe became maladaptive, detrimental in Greenland, directly undermining their ability to feed animals and themselves.
Incredible how even beneficial things can backfire in a new environment.
A profound example of unanticipated negative effects when transplanting systems without full understanding of the new, extreme context.
So less hay, more stress on animals, constant struggle for feed.
Right.
What about the animals themselves, cattle especially? Status symbols, but a huge drain on resources.
Exactly. This is where cultural values collided disastrously with environmental realities. Colder temperatures depressed hay production, devastating for livestock. Cattle, being large, powerful status symbols representing wealth, standing, continuity with Europe, required disproportionate amounts of hay and needed to be indoors longer in harsher winters.
Spiraling demand for hay that was harder to produce.
Precisely. Even their barley cultivation. Sources note crop failures were frequent even in temperate regions, let alone Greenland, so even basic staples were unreliable.
Did they try switching to hardier livestock, less demanding species?
They did attempt some adaptation here, showing some flexibility. Early attempts to introduce pigs, for instance, proved unsustainable. Archaeological evidence suggests pigs largely failed by around 1300 CE. Needed specific fodder, pasture not consistently available as things worsened.
But sheep and goats?
Sheep and goats proved far more resilient, became increasingly important to their diet, indicates some flexibility in animal husbandry. But it wasn't enough to solve the core agricultural crisis. Ultimately, their overall system livestock choices, practices, remained poorly suited to the increasingly harsh conditions. Geographically, areas like the Nuuk Fjord, the Western Settlement, were just too far north, too cold for sustainable agriculture to begin with, made that settlement especially vulnerable.
So literally farming at the edge of the world, and that edge was getting colder, harsher, more unforgiving. But you emphasized farming, especially cattle, remained central to Norse identity despite worsening conditions. Was this a form of cultural rigidity that became their undoing?
Precisely. One of the most powerful, tragic insights. Despite worsening conditions, mounting evidence their traditional practices were unsustainable, farming remained profoundly central to Norse identity. Social status intrinsically linked to land ownership, crucially, livestock ownership, particularly cattle. They'd made immobile investments, physically, culturally tied in cattle buyers, fertilized infields, those impressive stone churches anchoring their communities.
Tied them to the land, to that way of life.
Exactly, these physical structures, but more significantly, the underlying cultural values, social structures, bound them to vulnerable biomes, specific, increasingly unviable ways of life. Their adherence to these deeply ingrained agricultural methods, even when counterproductive, actively undermining survival, created a self-imposed limitation on resilience.
A difficulty in fundamentally changing their core way of life.
A profound difficulty. Even facing clear environmental feedback. That cultural rigidity, coupled with unforeseen negative consequences like the manuring paradox, truly highlights the difficulty of adaptation in such an extreme, rapidly changing environment. It wasn't just physical, it was cultural.
With farming failing, economy fraying, they must have shifted their diet dramatically. If the land couldn't sustain them, they looked to the sea. Our sources point to compelling evidence from stable carbon isotope analysis of bone collagen. What did that tell us? How much did their diet change?
This is some of the most fascinating, compelling evidence. Speaking directly from the bones of the Norse themselves, stable carbon isotope analysis of bone collagen, mostly from skeletons and churchyard burials, gives a direct quantitative window into their diet over time. Early on, around 1000 CE, when farming was thriving, their diet was predominantly terrestrial, reflecting their European heritage. Marine content then was maybe 20–50%, some fish, seal, but clear reliance on land-based resources.
Okay, some fish, but mostly farm food. What about towards the end? Around the 15th century. Big change.
By the late settlement period, around 1450 CE, their diet had shifted dramatically, unequivocally. The stable isotope analysis shows average marine protein content soared to approximately 80%.
80%. Overwhelmingly reliant on the sea.
Absolutely. The primary marine sources identified, corroborated by archaeology in their trash heaps, middens, were seals, particularly harp and hooded seals, plus various whales, walrus. Analysis of bones from middens at smaller farms confirms this. Seal bones constituted 60–80% of animal remains, substantial, ever-increasing reliance on marine resources to stave off starvation as terrestrial sources failed.
That sounds like remarkable flexibility, capacity to adapt. Directly contradicts those older theories of stubborn Norse refusing to change.
It absolutely does. This dramatic dietary shift is clear, undeniable evidence they weren't stubbornly unwilling to change. They recognized the existential necessity of increasing marine consumption as farming collapsed, and they successfully did so. Shows genuine flexibility and capacity to adapt. However, and this is the crucial part leading to their demise, this adaptation, while significant, was ultimately minimal and unsustainable.
Why?
Due to a critical limitation, a lack of superior marine mammal hunting technology.
So they changed what they ate, but critically, not how they got it, effectively. And this brings us to interactions with the indigenous Inuit.
Precisely. Unlike the contemporaneous Thule Inuit masters of Arctic survival, millennia of experience hunting there, the Norse simply did not adopt advanced Arctic hunting technologies. We're talking incredibly effective tools, methods. Umiaks, the large, versatile skin boats, kayaks, unparalleled for stealthy marine hunting. Highly effective harpoons with toggling heads designed not to pull out. Specialized, multi-layered skin clothing for superior insulation. Sophisticated sledge-shoeing for efficient travel over ice and snow.
Things the Inuit had perfected.
Exactly. The Norse, by contrast, predominantly stuck to their traditional European-style wooden boats hunting methods, primarily favoring summer hunting when conditions were less severe. Crucially, they failed to effectively hunt vital winter seal species, like bearded and ringed seals, which rely on breathing holes in the ice.
Breathing hole hunting.
A specific skill mastered by the Inuit, providing a vital, reliable food source during the harshest winter months when other food was scarce. The Norse never mastered it.
So it's an adaptive lag. They saw the problem, tried adapting diet, but their methods weren't effective enough long-term.
That's a perfect way to put it. Adaptive lag. recognized the need to shift diet, but either couldn't or wouldn't fully embrace the most effective hunting tech and strategies for the Arctic, which the Inuit had mastered, made their adaptation incomplete, ultimately a critical limiting factor in long-term survival. Moreover, this dietary shift, while necessary, came with its own significant costs, increased risks.
Oh.
Hunting at sea became increasingly challenging, dangerous as conditions worsened, more sea ice, more frequent severe storms, longer darkness. Records and archaeology suggest ships and men were frequently lost during these increasingly perilous hunts. So the very act of adaptation in this case became a new source of vulnerability. Highlights that not all adaptive strategies are equally sustainable or without significant trade-offs, increased mortality.
This sounds like a huge, perhaps fatal missed opportunity. Let's delve into the Norse and Inuit interactions. Friendly, widespread conflict, or something more subtle, tragic.
It's complex, fascinating, painted with mixed accounts. When the Norse first arrived around 985 CE, they didn't find living indigenous populations, though they found artifacts of an earlier culture, the Dorset people. It was only later, 13th to 15th centuries, that the Thule Inuit, ancestors of modern Inuit, migrated south into Greenland, eventually encountering the Norse settlements.
So they shared Greenland for a couple of centuries. What do the accounts Norse and Inuit say about their relationship? Peaceful coexistence, struggle.
Both Inuit oral traditions and surviving European accounts paint a decidedly mixed picture. Instances of both coexistence and conflict. Some Inuit stories describe the Norse as friendly people or strangers who lived in stone houses. There are accounts of limited cooperation, Inuit assisting Norse after pirate attacks, moments of shared vulnerability, mutual aid.
And European records.
Mention instances of affection, humane interaction, like the Icelander Bjorn Yorsolfari rescuing and bonding with two Inuit children, bringing them back to Iceland, however. The narrative is far from uniformly amicable.
Conflict, too.
Definitely. The Icelandic annals report a specific Inuit raid in 1379 killing 18 Norse Greenlanders. Clear, violent conflict, and some Inuit tales are considerably darker. Grisly tales of bloody feuds, sometimes depicting Inuit warriors disguising kayaks as icebergs before surprise attacks, burning Norse halls. Some variants even suggest violent extinction of the Norse through conflict.
So a bit of everything. Coexistence, cooperation, outright conflict. But modern scholars seem skeptical that widespread conflict was the primary cause of demise. Why?
While conflict undeniably happened, modern historians, archaeologists generally caution against concluding widespread, sustained warfare was the primary cause. For instance, while some Norse farms show burning, some skeletons show violent death. These can't be definitively linked solely to Inuit conflict.
Could be other things.
Accidental fires from poor heating, internal Norse feuds, banditry, all plausible. There's no widespread archaeological evidence of fortifications, mass graves from battles, or brunk settlements pointing to a systematic military defeat of Norse by Inuit. Highlights the challenge of reconstructing history from fragmented, potentially biased sources. Why interdisciplinary work is crucial. The evidence for persistent, overwhelming warfare just isn't there on the scale needed to extinguish an entire population.
Which brings us to what many now see as the most significant aspect. Not direct conflict, but a profound missed opportunity for cultural exchange. Our sources strongly emphasize this. What specific advantages did the Inuit have that the Norse failed to adopt? Why was this so critical?
This is perhaps the most crucial point. Less about hostility, more about cultural insularity. The Thule Inuit were master Arctic survivors. Their nomadic lifestyle allowed strategic camps in outer fjord coastal zones, rich marine resources following game migrations, and crucially, vastly superior Arctic hunting technology.
Like the umiaks and harpoons.
Whaling harpoon heads designed to detach but stay embedded with a line. The large, versatile umiaks carrying multiple hunters and catch. Smaller, agile quasaks for stealthy individual hunting. Sophisticated sledge-shoeing, ice runners making travel over ice far more efficient. The Norse, by stark contrast, tied to fixed farms, pastoralism, inner fjord plains, trying to apply European methods.
And the stark contrast is archaeological evidence shows no adoption by Norse of these advanced Inuit technologies, despite centuries living alongside them. How striking, how tragic is that?
Incredibly striking. Arguably the tragic core of their adaptive failure. Despite centuries of coexistence, virtually no archaeological evidence of Norse integrating superior Inuit tech skin boats, specialized harpoons, even essential tailored skin clothing into their own survival strategies. While they adapted diet, they didn't fundamentally change their approach to hunting or living in the Arctic.
Unlike later Europeans.
Exactly. Stands in stark, painful contrast to later Scandinavian settlers in the 1720s, like Izid himself. Within just 3 years of contact, they readily adopted Inuit tech. Umiaks, Quachoks, learned about harpoons, crucially how to hunt ringed seals at breathing holes that skill the Norse never mastered. Indicates a very different cultural attitude to knowledge transfer.
So not direct violent conflict wiping them out, but a profound cultural barrier, preventing them from adopting the most effective survival strategies from people who had thrived there for millennia.
Exactly. Their deeply ingrained cultural investment in European agropastoralism, coupled perhaps with ethnocentrism, a sense of cultural superiority towards the savage or pagan Inuit, prevented them fully embracing the most effective strategies, even as their own methods demonstrably failed. This cultural rigidity, inability to fundamentally shift deep-seated beliefs and practices, had a profound, ultimately fatal impact on their adaptive capacity.
Not a failure of individual will, but collective cultural paradigms failing to shift.
Couldn't overcome deeply ingrained beliefs defining them, even if those practices became an inescapable liability. This inability to learn from or even fully engage with the knowledge of indigenous people who'd mastered Arctic survival proved their ultimate undoing.
This leads us to the final, most enduring, perhaps most frustrating debate. What was their ultimate fate? Did they all perish in Greenland, extinction, or did they simply leave, planned abandonment, migration back to Europe? Let's start with arguments for mass death extinction.
Proponents emphasize the sheer unforgiving harshness of Greenland. Even during the medieval warm period, just barely survivable perhaps, even in good times, any significant negative changes would be profoundly impactful, quickly tipping scales towards collapse. Jared Diamond famously popularized the grim view. Every one of the Norse ended up dead in Greenland. Total extinction due to environmental mismanagement, cultural inflexibility.
And specific evidence cited.
Chilling archaeological details like cut marks on pet dog bones suggests extreme hunger, desperate act of consuming even beloved animals. Also, discovery of specific insect remains known to feast on unburied corpses, potentially indicates too few survivors left even for proper burials. And the Black Death, devastating Europe mid-14th century, introduces the possibility of a devastating external disease vector reaching Greenland. Though its direct impact isn't explicitly detailed, it remains a potential factor for mass mortality.
Pretty grim details, but significant counterarguments exist. The evidence isn't one-sided.
No, certainly not one-sided. Compelling counterarguments challenge total extinction or mass death within settlements. For one, meticulous analysis of Norse skeletal remains from burials, especially churchyards, consistently reveals no evidence of widespread starvation nor diseases commonly associated with excessive hunger.
So the bones don't show famine.
Not widespread famine or epidemic disease that would cause total collapse. Conditions were tough, life precarious, but the bones don't show that specific kind of end. Furthermore, crucial against mass perishment in homes, there's a consistent absence of bodies in households. Given Norse Christian burial rites prompt burial in consecrated ground, you'd expect bodies interred in cemeteries. Their absence in dwellings strongly suggests people either left or bodies were removed for proper burial elsewhere, not simply perishing en masse in homes and left unburied, which would be extraordinary deviation from cultural practice.
So if they didn't all die in their homes, bones don't show widespread starvation. The alternative is they left. Let's explore planned abandonment migration, arguments supporting the idea they just packed up and departed.
A very compelling argument is the striking scarcity of valuable items found in abandoned settlements. Archaeologists recovered very few precious objects, jewelry, ornate cups, candelabras, other metal artifacts from farmstead and church ruins.
The good stuff was gone.
This absence of elite material culture at significant sites is interpreted by some as strong evidence that settlers returning to Europe would have meticulously gathered and taken these valuables. Precious metals, religious artifacts, heirlooms suggests a methodical, not chaotic, departure. If they'd perished suddenly, such items would likely be left behind.
And the lack of bodies in houses ties into this too.
Exactly. Consistent lack of skeletons within houses is frequently cited against widespread death by starvation disease in dwellings. Lends significant support to the idea people either left or were buried elsewhere in cemeteries. Some archaeological findings even suggest farms abandoned in a seemingly calm, organized fashion with only the valuables missing.
Which aligns with choosing to leave.
Oh, right. Norse, facing insurmountable challenges to their preferred way of life, chose to leave in an orderly manner. to sustain cultural identity, maintain a custom lifestyle, even if abandoning the colony. Reframes disappearance not as desperate collapse, passive victimhood, but strategic, albeit forced relocation. Implies agency. They didn't just die out, made a conscious decision to abandon a colony that couldn't support their preferred life, even if it meant giving up land, status in Greenland for potentially lower status elsewhere.
A powerful shift in perspective, not just helpless victims. Were there external pull factors back to Europe incentivizing this?
Yes, certainly. Some researchers argue for a push and pull factor model, common migration pattern, push factors, declining conditions, diminishing optimism in Greenland, worsening climate, failing farms, ivory collapse, increasing isolation, pull factors, perceived opportunities for livelihood, relative stability, or simply return to familiar cultural conditions elsewhere, Iceland, Norway.
Like moving from a drought-stricken farm to a city job.
Exactly. The pull might have been relative stability, familiarity of Iceland, Norway, even if meaning changed social status. It's also been subtly suggested. Maybe a deliberate lack of official historical acknowledgement of abandonment to preserve future Norse legal or territorial claims to Greenland, strategic silence for future rights.
Interesting, but this planned abandonment migration hypothesis faces significant challenges too. If 2,500 people left, how? Logistically, why so little record?
Indeed, a major sticking point, primary challenge. Notable absence of evidence for ocean-going boats in historical records and archaeology within Greenland itself suggests Norse themselves may have lacked capacity to maintain large, sturdy vessels for mass departure, heavily dependent on Norwegian boats for long-distance travel trade.
And even if boats were available.
Logistical difficulties of transporting maybe 2,500 people across the treacherous North Atlantic immense. Our sources calculate it would need at least 100 round trips between Iceland and Greenland. Staggering number of voyages. Such a massive, coordinated undertaking seems highly unlikely to go completely unnoticed, unrecorded in detailed Icelandic-Norwegian records, where ship movements were often meticulously noted.
And what about the elite, chieftains, powerful families? Would they really abandon status to become penniless refugees?
Another strong challenge. Some scholars argue little incentive for elite groups, powerful landholders, chieftains to migrate to Iceland, Norway, where they likely become penniless refugees, losing considerable wealth, land, social standing, subject to feudal lords. Directly contradicts original purpose of establishing autonomy, influence in Greenland. Why abandon hard-won status for a diminished one?
Makes sense.
Furthermore, the absence of evidence, like bodies and houses, central to migration argument, can be interpreted differently. Poor preservation in archaeological record, organic remains decay, mass death at sea during increasingly treacherous voyages, bodies never reach land. Or, as discussed, Christian burial practices ensure bodies move to consecrated ground, even if few left to do the burying. Absence from homes doesn't necessarily prove mass migration.
Highlights that fundamental challenge. Interpreting silence, abscess, conclusions shaped by data, but also researchers' frameworks, analogies.
Exactly. Why the mystery persists. Why definitive answers remain elusive.
So we've explored the fascinating beginnings, the eerie silence, the perfect storm of interconnected factors, and we're left with this enduring, deeply human debate, migration or extinction. It truly wasn't a single clear-cut event, was it?
No, absolutely not. The disappearance is best understood not as a single dramatic event, but the culmination of that perfect storm. Interconnected environmental, economic, social pressures slowly, inexorably overwhelming them. Little Ice Age severely stressed their imported agriculture, made traditional farming increasingly untenable. Growing seasons shortened, winters harsher. At the same time, increasing sea ice, ferocious storms made vital trade routes treacherous, impacted access to essential iron, timber, made exports harder.
And that economic backbone, the walrus ivory trade, which initially drove them there, completely collapsed, leaving them without their primary currency. Climate against them, economic lifeline severed.
Precisely. Concurrently, ivory market collapse fundamentally undermined ability to acquire essentials from Europe, further isolated them, eroded economic foundation. While Norse did show notable adaptation, that significant diet shift to marine resources shown by isotopes, this adaptation was ultimately incomplete. Flexible in what they ate, but not how they acquired it.
Because they didn't fully embrace the Inuit's superior Arctic hunting tech and methods despite centuries alongside them.
Exactly. Failure to fully adopt superior Inuit tech, survival strategies, a critical limiting factor, cultural rigidity rooted in their deep Cultural investment in European agropastoralism, maybe ethnocentrism, prevented making fundamental shifts necessary to thrive in the Arctic. This, coupled with inherent challenges of their imported agriculture in a marginal, changing environment, created compounding vulnerability that ultimately overwhelmed them. Adapted to a warmer Greenland that no longer existed, couldn't readapt fast enough or thoroughly enough to the colder reality.
And that ultimate fate, mass migration or complete extinction, remains an active, passionate, scholarly debate. Compelling, yet often ambiguous evidence on both sides.
It absolutely does. Direct archaeological evidence for widespread mass starvation or epidemic disease is scarce. Absence of bodies in homes challenges catastrophic in situ demise. But conversely, while scarcity of valuables suggests orderly departure, immense logistical challenges of mass migration for 2,500 people, lack of clear evidence for sufficient ocean-going vessels presents significant hurdles to planned abandonment. The record's just not conclusive enough to declare one definitively over the other.
So what's the most plausible scenario then, combining all these complexities and ambiguities?
Highly probable the decline wasn't single, dramatic, a very gradual, protracted process. Likely involved a slow trickle of emigration individuals, families recognizing the dire situation, combined with diminishing birth rates in a shrinking community, increased mortality from various stressors, disease, accidents at sea on dangerous hunts, exposure, chronic limited hunger weakening the population over time.
A slow unraveling.
A slow, painful unraveling. Quiet abandonment as conditions became utterly unsupportable for their cherished way of life. Interpretation of absence of evidence remains contested. Different scholars draw divergent conclusions from the same limited data, and perhaps that's part of the enduring fascination.
This has been an incredibly detailed, thought-provoking deep dive, a truly enduring historical enigma. As we wrap up, what does Norse Greenland teach us today? Why does this mystery matter now in our own rapidly changing world?
The story of Norse Greenland is far more than historical curiosity. It's a powerful, profoundly relevant historical study on human adaptation, resilience, vulnerability, facing profound environmental economic shifts. It underscores the critical importance of flexible cultural practices. When your fundamental way of life, cultural identity, is too rigid, too intertwined with specific failing environmental conditions, it can prevent making necessary, even radical changes to survive.
Lessons in adaptability.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for diverse economic strategies. Putting all economic eggs in one luxury basket, like walrus ivory, makes you acutely vulnerable to external market shocks beyond your control. Starkly illustrates inherent dangers of over-reliance on single resources, especially in a changing environment. Dire consequences of failing to integrate knowledge from those already expert adapters to a given ecology.
So as you reflect on the Norse experience, what stands out to you the most? And what modern cultural investments or ways of life might be limiting our own capacity to adapt to changing global realities, climate change, resource depletion, new economic paradigms? It's a question worth pondering long after this deep dive ends.